All right, History 363. So today we're going to be talking about the First Triumvirate, an alliance between Julius Caesar, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Pompey the Great. Now, this alliance comes about because each of these players wants something. And let's actually start with Julius Caesar, because I really haven't mentioned Julius Caesar up till now. So Julius Caesar is from a patrician family that is having a bit of a renaissance lately. Remember, Julius Caesar was the consul behind the Lex Julia that gave citizenship to the Italians during the Social War. And so anyway, the wing of the Julii Caesaris are starting to show up again and holding high office. Although this is kind of a recent development. They haven't been particularly active, say, in the Middle Republic. Now, Julius Caesar, importantly, is the nephew of Gaius Marius. That is, his aunt had married Marius, and therefore Caesar is deeply implicated in Marian politics. Indeed, Julius Caesar's first wife is the daughter of Cornelia Cinnae, Cornelia. And although she ultimately dies, this is a reminder that Caesar is between his connection to Gaius Marius and his immediate marriage alliance with Cinna is very much in the Marian side that gets crushed and loses. Indeed, we're told there was a period of time when young Julius Caesar, as a teenager, goes into hiding because he's worried that he could be a victim of Sulla's violence. That said, Caesar manages to pull out. He is initially appointed as the Flamen Dialis. You may remember from the Roman religion lecture, the Flamen Dialis is one of the few Roman priests who has real taboos associated with him. Namely, he's not allowed to touch iron. Which makes it hard for him to, say, engage in a military career. So Caesar notably gets himself out of being the Flamen Dialis, which is actually not uncommon for people who get stuck with this position to do. And then he subsequently goes about a pretty typical military career. He is a military tribune during the Mithridatic War, although it's actually notable, he has a pretty typical political career. He really actually does very, very little fighting. I mean, he is involved in some actions in the Mithridatic War, but by the time Caesar is running for consul, he's done a little bit of kind of normal fighting. It's nothing compared to what Pompey has done. At that point, at this point in say 60 BC, no one doubts that the most accomplished, experienced general is Pompey. Crassus would be in second place in this little alliance. Now Caesar then is a quaestor and has a pro-quaestorship in Spain. He subsequently goes on to be aedile, and as aedile he makes a splash in two ways. One, he restores a number of the monuments to his uncle Gaius Marius, both as an act of self-promotion, and also citing himself with the fact, there clearly are people who supported Marius and liked Marius and voted for Marius that maybe don't want to be very public in the Sullan and post-Sullan era, but Caesar all of a sudden puts up these monuments to Marius, and this is a way of getting himself noticed and also affirming his political allegiances. Caesar then also as aedile borrows a huge amount of money. He goes into stupendous debt to put on fantastic ludi, fantastic games and plays and shows. And these are quite memorable. They get Caesar noticed. They also leave him deeply in debt. And indeed, when he's praetor and ready to embark on his Praetorian province, which is going to be a pro-praetor in Spain again, there is a movement to prevent him from leaving because he has so much debt hanging over him. And supposedly the person who kind of bails him out is Crassus. And this is a sign that Crassus and Caesar are already kind of having a kind of connection and relationship. Now, while in Spain, I think the stories usually place it during the pro-quaestorship. Supposedly Caesar either sees a statue of Alexander the Great or is reading a book about Alexander's deeds. Maybe he's reading the deeds listed on a statue. That Caesar supposedly bursts into tears, and someone says, Caesar, why are you crying? And Caesar says, I'm crying because, by the time Alexander was my age, he had conquered the world and died. And what have I done? Whether or not the story is true, it certainly gives us a hint at Caesar's incredible ego and ambition, which are absolutely real. Now, Caesar, in his as governor of Spain, bashes around some Iberian tribes and kills enough people. At this point, there probably is a 5,000 casualty threshold to earn a triumph that he can come back to claim a triumph. Now, that being said, his political enemies, of which there are many, try to stymie him. And in Rome, you're not allowed, you have to wait, if you're waiting to triumph, to do the triumphal parade, you have to wait outside the Pomerium, the sacred boundary of the city, and only enter it when you are the triumphing general. If you cross back over the Pomerium, your command is automatic, your prorogated command is automatically over, and there's no hope of you triumphing. This is just little legal, technical, religious issues. But if you want to run for office, Caesar needs to cross the Pomerium to announce his candidacy. And so his opponents hope by dragging out the approval of his triumph, they'll stymie him from running for office. And Caesar surprises everybody when he says, nope, I'm running for consul, and crosses over. So at this point, I should, just as a way of noting, Caesar's had a pretty typical political and military career, although again, military-wise, nothing to write home about. He hasn't, there's nothing that suggests that he's going to be one of the most famous captains in antiquity, at least in his biography yet. Maybe that's why he's weeping before the statue of Alexander the Great. Also, for the most part, his cursus honorum looks like the standard cursus honorum that so many of you successfully wrote down during your midterm, just moving up the ranks. There is one exception, which I think we should go back to, and that is Caesar has had himself elected the Pontifex Maximus. At this point, the Pontifex Maximus is an elected position. It probably actually has been since the 3rd century. In 104 BC, all of the priesthoods have actually become elected, but the Pontifex Maximus was a little ahead of that curve. So he has himself elected Pontifex Maximus. This is unusual. He's really too young. He's not particularly distinguished in any political, religious, or military fashion yet. And usually the people elected Pontifex Maximus are very senior men who have frequently already been consul or censor. So this happens to Caesar, halfway through his ascent up the cursus honorum, and it's rumored that this is enabled in part by massive electoral bribery, although accusations of electoral bribery are thrown around quite carelessly in the late Republic. At any rate, Caesar is Pontifex Maximus, and this famously leads to a scandal when the wife of the Pontifex Maximus is hosting a private religious ceremony just for women, which needs to take place in the Pontifex Maximus's house, and a young noble named Claudius Pulcher infiltrates the ceremony, possibly because he's trying to sleep with Caesar's wife. This is a big embarrassment to Julius Caesar, and he famously divorces his wife at the time, saying that he thinks that she is completely innocent in this scandal, but that Caesar's wife must be above suspicion. Again, this early run at Pontifex Maximus is the only really unusual thing that stands out about Caesar's otherwise very normal standard ascent up the cursus honorum. So now he's running for consul, and of course he just wants the political support, the votes, the money to affect his candidacy. So that's what Caesar needs, voters and money. At this point, Pompey is really desperate for somebody who will A, vote land for his veterans, and B, affirm his Eastern arrangements. Because Pompey's just made these arrangements himself, creating new provinces, setting up new tax systems and tribute systems. He wants a formal law of the Roman people to affirm that they are indeed legal. And he's been sort of shocked after coming back in 62 that he just thought that his eminence would allow someone would put up a land bill for his veterans, someone would affirm his Eastern arrangements, and everyone's like, oh, Pompey, we'll get it eventually. You'd be surprised when people blow him off. So Pompey wants those things badly. And one thing that Pompey has is veterans. And he can get his veterans to vote in Rome. And so the fact that he has that he can produce voters who, remember, when he discharges his army at Brundisium, he gives them a ton of money. A lot of guys who remember Pompey very favorably. And if he says, on this date, I need you to come and support my friend Julius Caesar for the consulship, that's a real advantage. More ominously, his veterans can also, in addition to just raw voting, can also intimidate people. Some veterans, if you're going to vote for Bibulus, who ultimately is Caesar's colleague, and some Pompeian veterans, looking like he's ready to beat you up, that also helps Caesar's cause. This is a point where violence oftentimes is associated with access to the constrained voting spaces of the Republic. Pompey has the veterans. He wants these laws. Caesar needs votes. And of course, Caesar also needs money. And so that's where Crassus comes in. Crassus is going to be the money man. But what does Crassus want? Well, Crassus is affiliated with a consortium of publicani. They've just put up a bid to collect the revenues in a lot of the new provinces that Pompey has just brought in. And they've made a massive mistake. They've massively overbid and are really at risk of financial liability. Remember, the way that Roman tax farming works is the tax farmers, the rate is actually basically set. So the tax farmers have to say, based on what we think the crops will be, we think we can collect the fixed tax rate, and we'll bid this, and we think we can get a little more back. So you put your bid out front, the Roman state gets that guaranteed, and then you hope that through the efficiency / brutality of your collection, you can collect a bit more. Well, the publicani have messed up. They need to fire their actuary because they've really overbid. So Crassus wants a law that will overturn this contract and allow the publicani that he's both associated with politically and also probably deeply invested with to get a better deal. So all three of these guys want something. And they therefore decided they were going to come together to form an amicitia, a friendship. And this is we call this the First Triumvirate. Now, very shortly, we'll talk about the Second Triumvirate, which is actually a formal constitutional position. It's forced upon this Roman state by violence, but it's a formal position. This First Triumvirate we're just using that name. Now, obviously, they're talking about Triumvirate, very standard sort of just Roman name for a board that has three men. But none of the triumvirate itself isn't any kind of formal position or board. It just refers to these three guys who have tremendous political power come together to form an alliance to dominate the Roman state. It's possible they thought about bringing a fourth guy in, and that was Cicero, who at this point is a profoundly respected ex-consul and someone who's known for his oratorical skills. Cicero has been a long-time ally of Pompey. But Cicero actually isn't interested. He actually finds the idea that these three guys are kind of forming an informal junta somewhat disturbing. Although he will continue to remain close to Pompey through the 50s. So Caesar is elected consul for 59, and in his consulship he delivers, particularly through a tribune of the plebs named Vatinus. He passes, and a variety of bills get passed. So Pompey's veterans get land in Campania. Pompey's settlement of the East is ratified. Crassus and his publicani get their renegotiated contract. And of course, Caesar wants something for himself. He wants a command. And so he gets a law passed that creates a special command, really on the mold of these Pompeian commands against the pirates and Mithridates, multi-provincial commands. And that will give Caesar the opportunity to finally prove himself militarily. He's probably tired of being the third place military guy beyond, Pompey first, Crassus second. Crassus has won the Spartacus War. Caesar wants an opportunity to actually prove himself as a general. So Caesar's provinces are initially going to be Illyrium, and it seems that Caesar actually sees this as the place where he's going to shine. There's a king on the Danube, a Dacian king named Burebista, and Caesar thinks that he might be able to spark a war with Burebista, and that would be a pretty good conquest to beat some big Danubian king. Caesar also gets the province of Cisalpine Gaul, and this is actually pretty convenient because Caesar wants a province where he can have a war, but also Cisalpine Gaul where he can be pretty close to Rome and therefore stay in his province but still communicate with his allies pretty effectively. Late in the game, the governor slotted for Transalpine Gaul dies, and Caesar is, this is actually as a matter of convenience. They say, well, why don't we just tack this on to Caesar's multi-provincial command? As we'll see, that's the reason that Caesar finds his war, or makes his war, in Gaul. So for the moment, everybody's happy. There are some people who are unhappy with this. In particular, Caesar's colleague Bibulus. Bibulus, who is an augur, basically tries to filibuster all of Caesar's legal efforts, basically by saying, look, I looked up into the sky doing my augury as both the consul and as a trained augur, and there was not one day during Caesar's consulship that was propitious for any of his laws to pass. And while this doesn't actually stop them, opponents of Caesar will eventually try to use this against him, at least by hinting that Caesar's laws were somehow religiously defective or otherwise legally illegitimate. So Caesar's consulship ends in 59. He goes off immediately into his 5-year command in Cisalpine Gaul, Illyria, and Transalpine Gaul. And it just so happens that the war that he's been looking for breaks out in Transalpine Gaul. Namely, so the province of Transalpine Gaul is mostly at this point just the sort of French Riviera along the coast of southern Gaul. But it then goes up the Rhone River. The Roman is such an important artery that the Romans therefore claim that as well. And there is a group of Celtic peoples, the Helvetians, who are wanting to engage in a mass migration. They're coming out of Switzerland. They're trying to cross over into another part of Gaul, and they ask permission to make part of their crossing over the Roman province. And Caesar says no, and indeed supposedly builds a wall and even militarily sends troops to fend off any attempts by the Helvetians to enter the province. The Helvetians say, okay, we'll just go north of the province. At this point, the Helvetians, in going north of the province, impact one of the Gallic tribes that are allied with the Romans, the Aedui, and Caesar uses that as a cause for military intervention. He's going to defend the Aedui as allies of the Roman people. Again, I think this is Caesar realizing that the migration of the Helvetians is a way to get a war, and Caesar wants a war. So he definitely also helps escalate the situation. Caesar marches north, eventually engages the Helvetians and defeats them with extraordinarily heavy casualties, and what remain of the Helvetians supposedly return back to their ancestral homeland in what's now Switzerland. And that's why the Swiss actually call themselves Helvetia. Now, that isn't enough for Caesar. In fact, what is surprising is he then continues to look for places he can intervene. Because now there is a Germanic king, Ariovistus, who is raiding across the Rhine, impacting some Gallic groups, allied with other Gallic groups. And so Caesar, in claiming to protect, again, other Gallic allies, confronts Ariovistus and eventually fights another bloody battle with Ariovistus and his Germanic followers. And of course now he keeps moving deeper and deeper into what the Romans call long-haired Gaul. And then these escalations continue to the point where Caesar keeps looking for two Gallic groups who are fighting, intervenes on behalf of one, and this is going to define Caesar in Gaul down to 51 BC. It's clear at this point Caesar is no longer even looking for pretext. He's just trying to conquer Gaul. Now, Caesar justifies his actions and celebrates his actions and propagates his actions with another really both important piece of Latin literature, an incredibly important historical source, and those are his Comentarii, his commentaries on the Gallic Wars, Gallo Bellico, de Bello Gallico. These are arranged year by year. They are probably modeled on the briefer reports, Comentarii, that a general would send back to Rome, simply describing key engagements, casualties, lost and inflicted, loot taken, things of that nature. Of course, Caesar extends it into this riveting, if extremely sparse, and his language is famous for its efficiency, account of the Gallic Wars. It's worth reading. We're not reading them in this class, but they are worth reading. They're still very compelling literature. And actually, as sources, this is another reason why we know so much more about the late Republic than any other time about Roman history. There is no Roman military operation better documented on a literary scale than Caesar's Gallic Wars, precisely because we have Caesar as the general, as a primary source, providing us with a narrative. Obviously potentially problematic because Caesar is clearly trying to shape the narrative, although really we've never been able to catch Caesar in a lie. So while he clearly is shaping the narrative in his own interest and is presenting himself as this efficacious commander, Caesar is, it's unclear that he's not really, it seems he's mostly telling the truth. So this, we could talk endlessly about Caesar's Gallic Wars. In the interest of time, however, I'm not going to go into major detail, other than Caesar also keeps trying to kind of do moonshot campaigns. He crosses over into Britain twice. Not for any really compelling military reason, but because no Roman general has gone to Britain. He crosses the Rhine twice, including building an elaborate bridge, possibly for some military reasons, because the Germans are a threat to some of his Gallic allies, but mostly just no one's ever done it, and now look, I've done it. And this is, of course, Caesar trying to distinguish himself, have a military reputation, probably at first just trying to rival Pompey, but increasingly as the Gallic Wars go on, Caesar is looking not just as a peer of Pompey, but maybe even someone who surpasses him. All right, so we have Caesar in Gaul, we have our First Triumvirate still holding. Next time we'll talk a bit about the politics in Rome and how this alliance comes under stress as the 50s wear on. We'll talk soon.